Imagine standing on a dusty hill looking down upon a small collection of huts huddled by a river. This is where our story begins, not with the clash of swords or the decrees of emperors, but with a simple settlement. This was the seed of Rome. From this humble origin, an empire would grow. An empire that would one day stretch from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Mesopotamia. Its story is not just a tale of conquest and glory. It is the story of us. It is etched into our laws, our languages, our very buildings. The Roman Empire is a ghost that still walks our world, its footsteps echoing through the corridors of time, reminding us of what humanity can build and what it can lose. The sheer scale of Rome is almost impossible to comprehend. For centuries, it was the world's only superpower. But this empire was not built by gods. It was built by people with ambitions, fears, loves, and hatreds. They were engineers and soldiers, poets and politicians, slaves and emperors. We are drawn to the story of Rome because it is a story of extremes. It is a narrative of incredible innovation and shocking cruelty, of unparalleled order and chaotic collapse. This journey will take us through the heart of this incredible civilization. We will walk with the legions on their long marches. We will stand in the Colosseum and hear the roar of the crowd. This is the story of how Rome rose, how it reigned, and how it eventually crumbled, leaving behind a legacy that would shape the future of the world forever. The legend tells us of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned by a river and suckled by a she-wolf. This is a powerful mythic foundation story, but the reality is likely more grounded, yet no less remarkable. Around the 8th century BC, a cluster of small villages on the 7 hills overlooking the river Tiber decided to band together. This was a strategic location. It was defensible. It had access to trade routes and the sea. This was the genesis of Rome. For the first few centuries of its existence, Rome was ruled by kings, learning and borrowing from its more powerful neighbors, like the Etruscans and the Greeks. The year 509 BC marks a pivotal moment in Roman history. The Romans, tired of the tyranny of their last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, rose up and overthrew the monarchy. They swore a solemn oath never to be ruled by a king again. In its place, they established something new, something revolutionary, a republic. Res publica, the public thing. Power was now meant to be shared. It was vested in elected officials, primarily 2 consuls who served 1-year terms, and a powerful senate composed of the city's elder statesmen and aristocrats. The early republic was marked by the conflict of the orders, a prolonged political battle between the wealthy patricians, who held most of the power, and the plebeians, the common people. This struggle led to the creation of crucial laws, like the 12 Tables, which codified Roman law for all to see, and the establishment of tribunes to represent plebeian interests. Over the next few centuries, the Roman Republic began to expand. This was not a grand, pre-planned strategy for world domination. It was a slow, often defensive process of conquering one neighbor after another across the Italian peninsula. The Romans proved to be masters of assimilation. They didn't just conquer, they incorporated. This unique approach turned former enemies into future soldiers and taxpayers, creating a powerful and ever-growing federation that laid the groundwork for the empire to come. By the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was a victim of its own success. The system designed to run a small city-state was buckling under the strain of governing a vast, sprawling territory. Immense wealth flowed into Rome from its conquered provinces, creating massive inequality. This wealth empowered ambitious generals who commanded armies more loyal to them than to the state. Men like Marius, Sulla, and Pompey the Great became political titans, using their military might to seize power in Rome. The Republic was sick. It was plagued by corruption, political violence, and a series of brutal civil wars. The old ways were dying. Into this cauldron of chaos stepped Gaius Julius Caesar. He was a brilliant politician, a gifted writer, and arguably one of the greatest military commanders in all of history. Through his conquest of Gaul, a campaign he brilliantly publicized through his own writings, Caesar amassed incredible wealth, a fearsome reputation, and a battle-hardened army that was fanatically loyal to him. The Senate, led by his rival Pompey, grew terrified of his power. They ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew this was a death sentence. Standing at the banks of the Rubicon River, the legal boundary of his province, he faced a choice. In 49 BC, with the legendary words, Alea iacta est, the die is cast, Caesar led his legion across the Rubicon. It was an act of treason from which there was no turning back. The civil war that followed was swift and brutal. Caesar's military genius proved unstoppable. He chased Pompey across the Mediterranean, defeating his forces in Greece and finally cornering him in Egypt. Within a few years, Caesar was the undisputed master of the Roman world. He was made dictator for life, showering the people with games and reforms. But Caesar's ambition was his undoing. A group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators and led by Brutus and Cassius, believed they were saving the Republic from a tyrant. On the Ides of March 15th, 44 BC, they surrounded Caesar in the Senate and stabbed him to death. They thought they had restored freedom. Instead, they unleashed another, even more vicious cycle of civil war. Caesar's murder did not save the Republic. It merely created a power vacuum. Into this void stepped Caesar's adopted son and heir, the young, clever, and utterly ruthless Octavian. He would finish what Caesar started, and in doing so, he would transform Rome forever. The assassination of Julius Caesar solved nothing. It plunged the Roman world into 13 more years of bloody conflict. The final showdown came in 31 BC at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa, crushed the forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Their subsequent suicides left Octavian as the sole ruler of the Roman world. Having witnessed decades of civil war, Octavian knew that Romans would never again accept a king or a dictator for life. So he performed a political masterstroke. In 27 BC, he went before the Senate and announced he was restoring the Republic. It was a brilliant piece of theater. In gratitude, the Senate bestowed upon him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and Princeps, or first citizen. In reality, he retained ultimate control over the army, the finances, and the most important provinces. He had created a new system, the empire, cleverly disguised in the traditions of the old republic. The age of Augustus had begun. This marked the beginning of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. After a century of civil war, Augustus brought stability. This period, lasting for roughly 200 years, was an unprecedented era of peace, prosperity, and expansion. Trade flourished on secure roads and seas cleared of pirates. The law was applied consistently across a vast territory that stretched from Britain to Syria. Augustus was a tireless administrator. He reformed the tax system, established a professional standing army loyal to the state, created a fire brigade and police force for Rome, and launched a massive building program, famously boasting that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. The system Augustus created was passed down to a succession of emperors. Some, like Trajan and Marcus Aurelius, were wise and capable rulers who expanded the empire to its greatest extent and governed with justice. Others were disastrous. Caligula was famously erratic and cruel, while Nero was a self-indulgent tyrant who presided over the Great Fire of Rome. The succession was often a bloody affair, with no clear system in place, yet despite the chaos at the top, the imperial machine that Augustus had built was so robust that it continued to function. For millions of people across the empire, the Pax Romana meant a life of predictable order and security that was previously unimaginable. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was literally true. The Romans were master engineers, and they built a network of over 50,000 miles of paved, durable roads that connected every corner of their vast empire. These roads were the arteries of Rome. They allowed legions to march quickly to quell rebellions, administrators to travel to distant provinces, and merchants to transport goods with unprecedented speed and safety. But more than that, they were conduits of culture. Along these roads traveled ideas, languages, religions, and the very concept of what it meant to be Roman. This incredible infrastructure bound the diverse peoples of the empire together, creating a shared economic and cultural space. At the center of this web was the city of Rome itself. In the age of the Pax Romana, it was the largest, most spectacular city on earth, with a population that swelled to over 1 million people. It was a city of incredible contrasts. On one hand, there was the monumental grandeur of the Forum, the temples, and the imperial palaces on the Palatine Hill. On the other, the vast majority of the population lived crammed into poorly constructed, multi-story apartment blocks called insulae. These were often dangerous, prone to fire and collapse. Life for the urban poor was a daily struggle, dependent on the state's grain dole to survive. The city was noisy, chaotic, and filled with the scents and sounds of people from every known corner of the world. Daily life for a Roman was dictated by social status. For the wealthy elite, a day might involve a light breakfast, followed by business dealings and political maneuvering in the morning. The afternoon was for leisure. The most important social ritual was the visit to the public baths. These were not just places to get clean, they were vast social complexes with hot and cold pools, saunas, gyms, libraries, and food stalls. It was here that business was conducted, gossip was exchanged, and friendships were forged. In the evening, the wealthy would host extravagant dinner parties, reclining on couches, and enjoying course after course of exotic food and wine, often entertained by musicians or poets. For the common Roman, life was far more laborious. A craftsman or shopkeeper would work from sunrise to early afternoon. Slaves, who made up a significant portion of the population, had the hardest lives of all, toiling in mines, on farms, or in wealthy households with few rights and little hope of freedom. Yet all classes of Roman society shared a passion for public entertainment. The state provided bread and circuses to keep the masses content. This meant free grain and spectacular games. The Circus Maximus hosted thrilling chariot races, while the Colosseum staged brutal gladiatorial contests and wild animal hunts. These spectacles were a fundamental part of Roman life, a way to display imperial power and distract the populace from their everyday hardships. The Roman army was the most formidable fighting force of the ancient world. It was the engine of conquest and the ultimate guarantor of the Pax Romana. At its heart was the legionary, a professional, highly trained and brutally disciplined heavy infantrymen. These were Roman citizens who signed on for 25 years of service. They were equipped with segmented plate armor, known as lorica segmentata, a large rectangular shield called a scutum, a short stabbing sword, the gladius, and 2 throwing spears, or pila. They trained relentlessly, not just in combat, but also in construction. A Roman legion on the march could build a fortified camp every single night, complete with ditches and palisades, making them almost impossible to surprise. A full-strength legion comprised nearly 5,000 men, divided into 10 cohorts. But the army was more than just legionaries. It also included large numbers of auxiliaries. These were soldiers recruited from the non-citizen peoples of the empire. They often served as cavalry, archers, and other specialist troops, providing tactical flexibility that the heavy infantry legions lacked. After completing their 25 years of service, auxiliaries and their families were rewarded with the ultimate prize, Roman citizenship. This was a brilliant strategy of Romanization, turning potential rebels into loyal defenders of the empire and integrating conquered peoples into the Roman military and social structure. The story of Rome is a story of relentless warfare and expansion. The Punic Wars against Carthage in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC were a struggle for survival that saw Rome gain control of the Western Mediterranean. Caesar's conquest of Gaul in the 1st century BC brought a vast new territory under Roman rule. Under emperors like Claudius, Britain was conquered. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest extent, pushing across the Danube into Dacia and east into Mesopotamia. Each conquest brought immense wealth, slaves, and resources back to Rome, fueling further expansion. The legions were not just conquerors. They were the builders of empire, constructing roads, bridges, and forts that pacified and Romanized new provinces. But the might of the legions had its limits. In 9 AD, 3 entire legions under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus were ambushed and annihilated by Germanic tribes in the Teutoburg forest. This disaster was a profound shock to the Roman psyche and effectively halted Roman expansion across the Rhine. In the east, the powerful Parthian and later Sasanian empires in Persia proved to be a constant and formidable rival. For centuries, Rome fought draining wars along its eastern frontier. The legions, stretched thin across thousands of miles of border, were a constant drain on the imperial treasury and manpower, a mighty shield that would eventually begin to crack under immense and unceasing pressure. The Romans were, above all, practical people. While they deeply admired the art and philosophy of the Greeks, their own greatest achievements were often in fields that combined beauty with immense utility. This is most evident in their architecture and engineering. They perfected the use of the arch, the vault, and the dome, allowing them to build structures on a scale never seen before. Using their revolutionary invention of concrete, they constructed magnificent aqueducts that carried fresh water for miles into their cities, massive bridges that still stand today, and public buildings designed to impress and serve vast numbers of people. The Roman genius was for building strong, durable, and functional structures that organized and improved life. The Colosseum stands as the ultimate symbol of Roman architectural prowess and perhaps its cultural character. This colossal amphitheater could hold over 50,000 spectators, who could enter and exit quickly through a complex system of vaulted corridors and staircases. It featured a retractable awning to provide shade and a complex underground network of tunnels and elevators to bring gladiators and wild animals up into the arena. Further north in Rome, the Pantheon, with its breathtaking coffered concrete dome and central oculus open to the sky, remains one of the most awe-inspiring buildings ever created. It is a testament to the Romans' mastery of space, light, and materials, a perfect marriage of engineering and art. In the literary arts, the Romans produced works that have resonated through the centuries. During the age of Augustus, poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid flourished. Virgil's Aeneid, a national epic consciously modeled on Homer's works, told the story of Rome's mythic origins and celebrated the destiny of the Roman people. Historians like Livy chronicled the history of the Republic, while Tacitus provided a searing and cynical critique of the early emperors. In philosophy, the Romans were less interested in abstract speculation and more drawn to practical schools of thought like Stoicism, which emphasized duty, self-control, and resilience in the face of adversity. This philosophy appealed deeply to the Roman elite, including the emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose meditations remain a classic of Stoic thought. Roman culture was also a melting pot. As the empire expanded, it absorbed and adapted gods, artistic styles, and ideas from the peoples it conquered. From the Egyptian cult of Isis to the Persian mystery religion of Mithraism, this syncretism is visible in their art. While early Roman art was heavily influenced by Greek models, it developed its own distinct style, particularly in portraiture. Roman sculptors created incredibly realistic and characterful busts of their leaders and citizens, capturing not just their physical likeness but their personality, their wrinkles, their worries, and their pride. This art was not for gods in distant temples. It was for people, a tangible and very human record of their time on earth. There is no single reason for the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It was not a sudden event, but a long, slow, and complex process of decline that unfolded over centuries. The crisis of the 3rd century was a major turning point. From 235 to 284 AD, the empire was racked by constant civil war, with dozens of barracks emperors rising and falling in quick succession, often murdered by their own troops. This political instability was coupled with rampant inflation as emperors devalued the currency to pay their armies. The crisis also saw devastating plagues that reduced the population and barbarian invasions that pierced the frontiers for the first time in centuries. The empire nearly broke apart completely. The empire was revived by the strong leadership of emperors like Diocletian and Constantine, but the underlying problems remained. The empire had simply grown too large and complex to be governed effectively from a single center. Diocletian recognized this and split the empire into a tetrarchy, a rule of 4, with 2 senior and 2 junior emperors to govern the vast territories. Later, Constantine would establish a new capital in the east, Constantinople, shifting the empire's center of gravity away from Rome. The western half of the empire was poorer, less urbanized, and had longer, more vulnerable frontiers to defend against migrating Germanic tribes. It was becoming the weaker partner. Economic decay was a critical factor. Centuries of war, an enormous and expensive bureaucracy, and a vast army were a crippling financial drain. Heavy taxes crushed the small farming class, forcing many to abandon their land or become tenant farmers, tied to the estates of the wealthy. The empire's reliance on slave labor had stifled technological innovation, and as conquests ceased, the supply of new slaves dried up. The intricate trade networks that had defined the Pax Romana began to break down. Roads fell into disrepair. The economy became more localized and fragmented. The West was slowly grinding to a halt, losing the economic vitality that had sustained it for so long. The final blows came from relentless external pressure and internal weakness. From the late 4th century onwards, waves of Germanic peoples, Goths, Vandals, and Franks, began to cross the Rhine and Danube frontiers. They were not always invaders. Many were migrants seeking land and safety, fleeing from the westward push of the Huns. The weakened Roman state could no longer control this movement. It began to recruit these barbarians into its army, but their loyalties were often to their own chieftains rather than to Rome. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome, an event that sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean. In 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. There was no great battle. The Western Empire didn't end with a bang, but with a whimper. The fall of Rome in 476 AD was not the end of the Roman Empire. It was only the end of the western half. In the East, the empire not only survived but thrived. Centered on the magnificent, heavily fortified capital of Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, would endure for another 1,000 years. This was a Roman empire that spoke Greek, was profoundly Christian, and developed its own unique and vibrant culture. It saw itself not as a successor state, but as the direct, unbroken continuation of the empire founded by Augustus. The emperors in Constantinople were the true Roman emperors. The Byzantine Empire carried the torch of Roman civilization through the Middle Ages. The Emperor Justinian in the 6th century made a valiant attempt to reconquer the lost western provinces, and for a time he succeeded in retaking Italy and North Africa. His most enduring legacy, however, was the Corpus Juris Civilis, a massive codification of Roman law. This work preserved the Roman legal tradition and would become the foundation for the civil law systems of many modern European nations. While Western Europe fragmented into smaller kingdoms, Byzantium preserved the classical knowledge of Greece and Rome in its libraries and monasteries, acting as a vital repository of ancient learning. For a millennium, Constantinople was the largest and wealthiest city in Christendom, a bastion against successive waves of invaders from the east, including the Persian Sassanids and later the Arab Caliphates. Its mighty walls stood as a shield for Europe. But over the centuries, the Byzantine Empire was weakened by constant warfare, internal strife, and the schism with the Catholic Church in the West. The final fatal blow came in 1204, not from its traditional enemies, but from the Knights of the Fourth Crusade, who brutally sacked Constantinople. Though the empire was later restored, it was a shadow of its former self. In 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, using powerful new cannons, finally breached the city's legendary walls, bringing the Roman Empire to its ultimate end. The legacy of Rome is all around us. It is in our languages, with Latin forming the basis of French, Spanish, Italian, and Romanian, and providing countless words to English. It is in our laws, our concepts of citizenship, and our republican forms of government. It is in our architecture, from the domes on our Capitol buildings to the concrete we use to build our cities. But perhaps its greatest legacy is the idea of Rome itself, the concept of a universal, multicultural state bound by law and a shared identity. The story of its rise and fall remains the ultimate case study in power, civilization, and the enduring patterns of history. Rome never truly fell, it simply transformed, and its echoes will continue to shape our world for eternity.